Floating in space alone is a freaking scary thing if you think about it. One small push and there's no air resistance to stop you from flying away at a constant velocity into the bleakness of space. Gravity successfully conveys that primal visceral fear throughout this movie at its basic core, but what's even more amusing about it is that were you to strip this movie's deeper layers of spiritual meaning and watch it again, there's more to it in its surface than it might seem at first glance. This movie is simply a landmark achievement in filmmaking, and filmmaking at its finest. There's no easier way to break down the story for you. A couple of astronauts run into a disaster in space, they got to get back to Earth alive. And that's really the story. So for those of you who complain that the story is too simple, I kind of understand where you're coming from. But I also think you missed the point of the whole film. Gravity isn't a movie about complex plots and characters to begin with. It's about appealing to the most basic, primal instinct of humans, the fear of death. It's a film that's more about putting the viewer into the visceral experience of floating helplessly in space than anything else. Furthermore, this simplicity is exactly what makes this movie very accessible to anyone, even with its deeper spiritual themes buried underneath.
I know you never realized how devastatingly good looking I am, but I need you to stop staring and help me with the tether.
Then you can interpret the spiritual meanings of gravity, where the main character's ordeals mimics the ordeals we as human beings go through in real life. The shrapnel flying through space can be interpreted as the trials and tribulations humans go through in life. At one point, after our main character Dr. Ryan, played by Sandra Bullock, finds safety in an airlock, she curls herself into a fetal position, signifying rebirth or resurrection. There's so much subtle, metaphorical and symbolic imagery in this film that you can infer. Some of them could be religious. How you interpret those imagery and themes is entirely up to you, the viewers. You could still see this film on a surface level as an intense drama of how a character changes his or her perspective of life after going through a hell of a space ride. But for others, the film could be so much more than an action thriller because of how director Alfonso Cuarón incorporates this imagery deliberately, but subtly enough that it does not sound over preachy. As impressive and entertaining as a movie Gravity is, it's even more amazing how the filmmakers could conceive such a well-planned film in the first place. The first thing you'll notice is that the opening shot of this movie is 13 minutes long. 13 minutes! The entire opening sequence is shot as one continuous long shot without any cuts, which adds on to the immersion without using any traditional editing tricks that we have gotten used to in the history of cinema. That continuous shot feels real because there's no trickery with normal cuts. And there are many great long shots like this throughout the film. And given the complexity of a film of this scale, about 90% of this film has to be made in photorealistic CGI, and you can see more of how they did it in the behind the scenes features on this Blu-ray. More on that later in the video. But right now, suffice it to say that Gravity is a film you simply have to experience. It's a commendable achievement from a technical level, as well as from a filmmaking standpoint.
Hit hard, grab a hold of anything you can.
Gravity is simply stunning to look at on Blu-ray. Watch this on the biggest home cinema screen you can find, perhaps even in 3D. This movie demands a big screen experience. Speaking about the 3D, I currently own the 3D Blu-ray for this review, but as of this recording, I do not own a 3D TV set yet. But I have seen this film in digital IMAX 3D, and this is not one of those films where the 3D is nothing more than just a gimmick. 3D for this film really adds to the immersion, especially for a film like this, where the actual experience of watching it is crucial to its effectiveness. Perhaps I could recommend watching this movie on the Oculus Rift for the full immersive experience as well. There are some point of view shots that are really effective in 3D. But here's another great thing about this movie. Even without the 3D, Gravity still works as a great movie. The 3D adds to the experience rather than ruining it. There's a very minute grain or noise that I spotted in some of the space scenes, but nothing that is glaringly bad. The only real complaint that I have is nothing to do with the actual Blu-ray transfer, but more on the limitation of 1080p or even 2K resolution on big screens. And this film was mastered in 2K. When I saw this film in IMAX 3D with the 2K projection, the large screen size actually made some of the pixels discernible, which can break the illusion and remind you that you are watching a movie. Perhaps it's really important for IMAX to increase their projector resolution to 4K if they want good quality images on their large screens. But on the home TV it looks great, and like I said, watch it on the biggest one you can find. Audio for Gravity is equally important to the experience of the movie. And although this film depicts space authentically as having no sound, because as you know, sound cannot travel through a vacuum, you hear sound effects in this film when a character makes contact with something. Because as you know, and I'm probably gonna sound like a physics teacher, sound can travel through solid objects. Okay, end of physics lesson. How does the sound mix of Gravity fare on Blu-ray? It's simply the best one I've ever heard so far this year. The Oscar nomination for sound editing and mixing for this film this year is well deserved. This is an extremely well engineered sound mix with one of the most precise pannings of sounds I ever heard, even when it comes to dialogue. Dialogue in this film does not just come from the center channel like most movies, they float accurately around you with the astronauts, to the point that you can close your eyes and point almost exactly where the astronaut is on the screen just by listening to the sound mix, and the astronaut will be right where you pointed. This may sound like exaggeration, but it's exactly how the filmmakers designed this particular sound mix, as you can see in the behind the scenes features. Every sound is panned with precision. Even the music is not always on the front channels. They pan with the objects flying across the screen. It's a deliberate sound choice, because since there are no whoosh sound effects for objects flying in space, the filmmakers use the music as placeholder for these sound effects, which is a very neat idea, even better when heard in action. Subwoofer chatter is also effectively used with deep rumbles and pulsating heartbeats. And that's just with the limited 5.1 sound mix included on this Blu-ray. Now, the elephant in the room I should mention is that there's no 7.1 mix included on this disc, even though it was natively mixed in 7.1 and Dolby Atmos. For me, I'm not complaining too much on this issue since I haven't upgraded my sound system to 7.1 yet, but I agree that the 7.1 mix should have been included. But even with just 5.1, Gravity is still one of the best, if not the best movie sound mix of 2013. Let's talk about some of the extras included here. You will be impressed. There's a behind the scenes documentary feature called Gravity Mission Control, where they will go through the exquisite details of the 4 years that it took to make this film. Stuff like the innovative LED box lighting that they have invented for the film, so that the lighting of the actors' faces will match exactly how Alfonso Cuarón and his team planned in the previous phase. The robotic arm that they make to more accurately replicate precise camera movements planned by Alfonso, the precisely planned character animation of the astronaut suits, and the photorealistic rendering that matches exactly the life elements with insanely pre-planned lighting and compositing. I can go on and on, but just go and see the documentary. You'll be blown away at how meticulously planned and made this movie was. There's also a companion short film called Annie-Cat, an interesting short which you should only watch after seeing the movie to avoid spoilers. Gravity is the pinnacle of filmmaking for me. It shows how effective the art of filmmaking can be, even with what seems to be a relatively simple story. You can still argue that the story isn't as complex or as engaging as the film's visceral action, but the simple story does not take away from the film either. In fact, it's what I feel makes this movie strong and accessible. This movie is really an experience movie, more about you experiencing firsthand the intense action with the characters than just watching a story told to you passively. And it's really the little things and subtleties in filmmaking that the filmmakers gets right and executes extremely well, like the long continuous shots, along with his deep, subtly layered human spiritual themes that makes Gravity one of the best films ever made in 2013.